Thank you for inviting me to share with you the preliminary results of our current research. And I insist on the word preliminary because not all the interviews have been completed yet. My name is Marianne Moore. I work for a peace movement called PAX. IKV Pax Christi was our former name, but we shortened it into PAX. And we are based in the Netherlands, and we are a member, as Irene told you, of the European Coalition on Conflict Minerals. And this coalition issued the first report in June 2021 with the participation of 15 member state competent authorities at the time. But those were still very early days. In a sense that most competent authorities and also the Commission were still sort of developing their approach of the implementation of the 3T Gold regulation. So we decided to conduct a follow-up research, and the report of this research will be published in this semester. So the first semester of 2023. And this concerns the evaluation of the implementation of the first, the evaluation of the first implementation year being 2022. We still have 5 interviews to go. So it is possible that in the final version of the report, there might be small changes compared to what I share with you today. Also, it is good to remember that this follow-up report will partly focus, and especially conclusions and recommendations, on the review that is being carried out this year by the Commission on the 3T Gold regulation. Okay, having said that, can I have the second sheet, please? I think it would be a good thing to start off with the promising developments and the positive developments of the implementation of the 3T Gold. I've selected 3. I could have selected much more, but I selected 3, and for each promising development, we also defined a suggestion to further strengthen this promising development. So the first promising development that we identified is the fact that at a national level, legislative and democratic procedures to implement the 3T Gold regulation are actually completed or in a very advanced state and on its way. So in view of this fact, we would like to suggest that maybe the European Commission could do like an assessment of the different forms of implementation in the member state legislation and the democratic processes that were conducted in each member state, and also assess the actual implementation capacity in each member state, and maybe promote the best practices that come out of this analysis. The second positive development is in fact the fact that there are structural meetings taking place between the competent authorities. It has become indeed a standing practice. And a positive follow-up of those meetings is that the European Commission is now developing software as to make it possible to share data, import data among the competent authorities of the member states. And I think that is a very important step forward. We could detect, or the competent authorities could detect multi-entry imports through this software, and even maybe prevent circumvention of the regulation by certain importers. As I understand, this software is on its way, so let's wait for it. Regarding this sharing of import data, we would like to suggest as a coalition to also focus on the import through trading hubs. Switzerland, of course, is a very important trading hub for Europe, but also Dubai. And we often forget the Dutch Antilles. Dutch Antilles are an important hub for Latin American gold from Colombia, for example, and Suriname and Brazil. What could be done is analyzing the joint data of those trading hubs and to understand better the role of those trading hubs and the origin of the minerals that are being traded in those specific countries. And again, especially for Europe, Switzerland would be very interesting to further analyze and share this information among, of course, the competent authorities and, if possible, also with the other stakeholders. The third positive development is the standing practice of exchange between all stakeholders, being competent authorities, the European Commission, the consultants of the European Commission, for example, the consultant who is working on the review, and the civil society organizations. We hope that this year or in the course of next year, this could be taken to a next level. For example, by discussing between stakeholders very concrete cases of conflict minerals at an upstream level, and try to identify whether in these specific cases the minerals are indeed being imported into the European Union. And if so, we could even think of like a joint field mission to assess the legitimate violations at a local level. Can I have the third sheet, Alejandro? We also identified three main challenges. Of course, we could have identified more, but we made a selection of the most important ones, being the thresholds, the industry schemes, and the audit reporting by the importers. Well, to start with the challenge of the thresholds, as far as we can see right now, but again, there are still some interviews to be conducted. The main conclusion is that only a small number of the importers of 3T gold exceed the thresholds. For the main group of member states, it means that a percentage of 3 to 10% of the importers of 3T gold actually exceeds the threshold. There are always exceptions. There is, for example, one country where this percentage is above the 35%. And there are also countries, or one country where right now it doesn't seem to be even less than 3%. So, and in some country, the threshold is only being exceeded for one specific mineral. So, for example, only for tungsten and not for the other minerals. So there is still quite some analyzing to be done regarding those thresholds. And then, of course, the question is, what does it mean in terms of volumes and quantities? Because the fact that only a small percentage of companies exceed the threshold does not mean that those companies do not cover a huge volume of the import. So in other words, what percentage of the total volume or quantity of the import falls actually under the regulation? And unfortunately, we have only the data of two major importing countries. And in those two countries, 80 to 90% of the total volume of the import is being covered by the regulation. It would be interesting to see how this plays out in the other importing countries, but it is promising that, yeah, the threshold seems to cover in the major importing countries such an important volume of the import. Of course, it leaves the question of those minor importers who do not exceed the threshold. Uh, what is the profile of those importers? Are these private persons or smaller companies that that do have a certain volume of import, but just not enough to exceed the threshold? That is also an important issue to be further analyzed. So a second issue regarding the threshold is that three difficult groups have been identified, difficult groups of importers. And some of them are even reluctant to do the reporting. It concerns, for example, agencies and intermediaries in countries with larger ports. And those agencies can say, for example, look, I'm only an agency, a trade agency or an intermediary, so it's not up to us to do the reporting, and we don't fall under the regulation. That is the one who's going to use the mineral. So that is something, that has to be discussed, I suppose, how to deal with those cases. A second group are the investors, especially gold investors, of course, in the European investment markets. Sometimes they don't have like physical import, but more like virtual import because it concerns investments. And the third group are importers who divide, for whatever reason, their import over several countries, sometimes under different names. And those companies are sometimes also registered only in one particular place, while they are importing through different countries. The question is, of course, regarding those three groups, will the upcoming software of the European Commission be able to tackle this issue and to give insight in this specific problematic? And can a European approach be developed regarding those more difficult groups of importers? Last but not least, I think it is interesting to see that there are huge differences between the European member states regarding the percentages of import of each specific mineral, being some countries almost only import tungsten, other countries have like a more equal import among the four minerals, and others focus mainly on gold. And yeah, it would be our suggestion to have better data on those differences between the European member states, differentiated by the sort of mineral, if possible. So it wouldn't, a publication, an annual publication maybe of the import of minerals per at a member state level, and then for each of the four possible conflict minerals. That would be, I think, also a major step forwards in the analysis of those import streams. So the second challenge is a major one. It concerns the industry schemes and the selection criteria for ex-post checks. I think the first conclusion is that many companies, maybe even the majority, but it is difficult for us to establish, but at least many companies source from industry schemes, especially RMI and LBMA. As far as we know, none of those industry schemes have been recognized yet by the European Commission. And because of that, there is not yet a wide list of smelters and refiners recognized smelters and refiners, because it is directly related to the recognition of the industry schemes. But nevertheless, we know that industry schemes are being assessed right now, and it is only a matter of time before, you know, one or two or maybe even more industry schemes will gain recognition. We have also noted that the interpretation of some importers is if they are a member of an industry scheme or associated to an industry scheme, they have no longer the obligation to present, for example, audit reports, because they think they have outsourced it completely to the industry scheme. Then, of course, the question is, what is the interpretation of the status of recognized industry schemes by the competent authorities? And we have detected slightly different approaches among the competent authorities. Some competent authorities do not consider industry schemes as leading in the selection criteria for ex-post checks. It only exempts importers from the obligation to do third-party audits, but they can be selected for ex-post checks. While other competent authorities consider that sourcing from recognized industry schemes makes selection for an ex-post checks at least less likely, especially when importers source exclusively from recognized industry schemes. So there we see a slightly different approach among competent authorities. Now, one might say that the concept of industry schemes and wide list of smelters and refiners transfers to a certain extent, of course, and to a certain level, the assessment responsibility of the authorities to the industry scheme, to the certified smelters and refiners. If that is the case, and of course we can discuss to what extent that responsibility is being transferred to industry schemes, but that being said, it is extremely important from our point of view to get very, very transparent data regarding the sourcing of those refineries and smelters and industry schemes. And the question, of course, is, can those industry schemes deliver detailed information on the origin of the minerals? And related questions to that is, especially when we consider the fact that currently industry schemes are being assessed by the Commission, it raises two questions specifically on this assessment by the Commission. To what level need industry schemes, need they to assess and report on their supply chain? So what are the demands of the Commission specifically on the level of information that they have to provide? And the second question is, what if the direct supplier of an industry scheme is not a producing mining company, but let's say a trading agency or a trading hub or an intermediary? Will this be accepted under the criteria of the assessment of the European Commission as sufficient? Or do we want the industry schemes to deliver very detailed information about the origin of the minerals up to the producing mining side? So the third challenge would be the audit reports. Please note that most importers and also the authorities see this period as a learning process in progress. So many competent authorities only received a small part of the audit report so far. And there are also different approaches by the competent authorities on how to deal with those audit reporting. For example, some competent authorities ask audit reports of all importers that exceed a threshold, and others only do select a certain group of importers that exceed the threshold and only ask an audit report of this specific group. Then impacts on the ground. I think that is important for the discussion, or I hope it is. Yeah, the question, of course, is there already an impact noticeable or visible at an upstream level? In other words, are producers, mining companies trying to respect human rights and international standards in order to guarantee their access to the European market? Well, as far as we can see now, but of course we are still in the implementing phase of the 3T Gold regulation. But as far as we can see now, the regulation is not very well known in especially Central Africa and Latin America. And by those major mining companies who are familiar with the regulation, it doesn't seem to be an issue that is very urgent, or maybe, but that is an interpretation from my side, it is not seen as a major risk not to comply entirely, or it is not clear how they can comply. So there is a lot of work to be done from our point of view at that side of the supply chain. A major risk, of course, is that the artisanal miners will be excluded from the large industry schemes. They probably, do not comply with the criteria of those major industry schemes, and as a consequence, they might have a limited access to the European market. And as you all know, the artisanal miners are a very vulnerable group in Latin America and Africa, for example, but they are an important component of the mineral production in those countries. And there are, of course, possible solutions like formalization of corporations of artisanal miners, and also try to include artisanal miners in industrial concessions so they can make use of the supply chain of an industrial company. The last point, this is really my last point, Alejandro, but it is an important one. It is the issue of the insight we have in the supply chain. The major objective of the 3T Gold regulation is to, I put it in my own words, to prevent import of conflict minerals into the European Union. And in order to prevent this, we need to know the origin of those minerals. So far as civil society organizations, if we have knowledge of conflict minerals at an upstream level, it is in fact impossible for us to trace down the buyers, smelters, refiners, and importers. And on the other side of the supply chain, let's say where the competent authorities are working, on the import level, on the EU level of import, it is often impossible for the competent authorities to get full information on the supply chain and to trace down or to get the information up and until the level of the production side. So that leaves us with a big question mark of how effective the regulation can be without having full insight in the supply chain, and how this can be could be resolved. And as a coalition, we think that there's a key role for industry schemes and also producing mining companies in the disclosure of their clients and suppliers. That could be already a major step forward. And maybe we could discuss later on whether it would be possible to have a lobby towards mining companies, in producing countries and with refiners and smelters on the disclosure of this information.